Hello everyone, good day to you. Now, this is the third episode of our weekly videocast, and on this episode, I'm going to continue my explanation of lesson 2. So, in our previous episode, we have discussed how to open a presentation, how to outline our presentation, and I'm going to continue with uh, our next discussion that is about the expressions that we can use to introduce our topic, sequence our presentation, expressions that you may use when you are dealing with pictures, charts, videos, and expressions for handling questions. But first, we'll start with talking about duration. Now, after you open your presentation with introduction of yourself, giving topic of your presentation, and you should also it is also a good thing that you describe the duration of your presentation, and we can do this by telling our audience that, well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes, or Mr. and Miss, my presentation will last for around 15 minutes. This presentation is going to take 20 minutes of your time. Or I'm going to explain the new salary regulation in 15 minutes. In less than 30 minutes, you will learn how to increase productivity without etc. etc. So these are the expressions that you can use to explain duration of your presentation. And you have to do this in the beginning of your presentation. So, how about if we practice these expressions? Please repeat after me. I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes. My presentation will last 15 minutes. This presentation is going to take 20 minutes of your time. I'm going to explain the new salary regulation in 15 minutes. In less than 30 minutes, you will learn how to increase productivity without. Yeah, those are the expressions for telling our audience of the duration of our presentation or talk. Next thing is main body of presentation. Now, after you elaborate the duration of your presentation, then you can go into the big big part of your presentation, that is the body of presentation. And when we talk about the body of presentation, we will have to be able to sequence our presentation, and also there are expressions for using visual aids, expressions for checking audience understanding, expressions to end a presentation, and expressions for handling questions. So you have divided your presentation into three parts, four parts. Therefore, you have to sequence your presentation. Now we can use transitional words as a way to sequence our presentation. We can say firstly, secondly, thirdly, finally. These are the common way to sequence our presentation. Well, firstly, a good presentation must have a good structure. Secondly, modern presentation needs visualization. Thirdly, effective presentation must be well designed. And finally, excellent presentation has to be well delivered. But transitional words like these are considered by today's standard as obsolete because many people have used them and people use them regularly. So you have to be creative with words. Don't just use formulaic expressions. This is what I call as formulaic because it's like a formula. It's something that people always do. People remember. Now, these formulaic expressions are the ones that you have to avoid because if it is easy for anyone to use, then it is not special. So you have to be creative finding different words that can have the same meaning or the same function as these formulaic words. So some examples, for example, to begin with, a good presentation must have a good structure. Or, for a start, a good presentation must have a good structure. Let me start by saying that a good presentation must have a good structure. First and foremost, a good presentation must have a good structure. I'll begin with a good presentation must have a good structure. So the words printed in bold are some other ways that you can use to avoid the formulaic expressions that I have presented in the previous slide. So how about if we practice these expressions together? Repeat after me. To begin with, for a start, let me start by saying that first and foremost, I'll begin with. There you go. But how about when you come to second or third item? Now, with second and third item, the words are quite easy. Instead of saying secondly, thirdly, you may say next, another point, then, also. Let's repeat together. Next, modern presentation needs visualization. Another point that we have to learn is that a modern presentation needs visualization. Then, modern presentation needs visualization. Also, an effective presentation must be well designed. Moving on to the next point, an effective presentation must be well designed. So those are expressions which you can use to substitute transitional word like secondly, thirdly. And when it comes to the final item or final part of your presentation, the expressions that you may use are, as my final point, an excellent presentation has to be well delivered. Lastly, an excellent presentation has to be well delivered. The last thing that you have to understand is that an excellent presentation has to be well delivered. Steve Jobs, in his days, often used two kinds of expressions for describing the last part of his presentation. Now, what makes Steve Jobs unique is that instead of instead of saying that this is the last thing, this is the last part, Steve Jobs used different phrase. He always said one more thing or one last thing. So Steve Jobs did it because he wanted to add an atmosphere of giving bonus to his audience. So instead of saying the last thing or one final thing, he said one more thing, one last thing. So the listeners would think that Steve Jobs gave them a bonus, which actually it wasn't a bonus. It was actually the last part of his presentation. But because he used different words, then it creates different feeling to his listeners. So you may use Steve Jobs' formulaic expression. Let's practice together. One more thing. An excellent presentation has to be well delivered. One last thing. An excellent presentation has to be well delivered. Yes, those are the expressions for sequencing. From the first point, second point, third point to the last point. Now, how are you going to finalize your presentation? Wait, before that, we have to talk about visuals because in the middle of our presentation, we often have to show our audience data and we often use charts or photos to explain the data. Now, when you use visuals in your presentation, there are expressions that you can use to draw your audience interest to the visualization that you have prepared. You may use, as we can see on this slide, the photos show that, or let me draw your attention to this bar chart. This pie chart gives a clear explanation about more expressions. If you use video, you can say, in this video, we will see a demonstration of the following pictures are the proofs of okay. And occasionally, we need to check our audience just to see or to be sure that our audience is still following us. Now, if you want to know if you speak too fast, you can ask your audience, tell me if I'm speaking too fast. Or you may say, am I speaking too slow? If you are dealing with big audience, let's say you do presentation in front of 50 people, then you need to make sure that people in the back can still hear you. So you can use expression like, can you hear me on the back? Am I loud enough for everyone here? More expressions. Are you still following me? So far, do you understand my explanation? So if you want to be sure that your audience is still catching up with you, that they still follow your explanation, you can say these two expressions. Are you still following me? So far, do you understand my explanation? And when you want to finish your presentation, you may use these three expressions. This brings me to the end of my presentation. This is the end of my talk. Or this leads us to the end of my talk. To summarize, we have to realize the challenge. To sum up, I'd like to remind you that, in conclusion, this new product will bring So after you signal the end of your presentation, then you should give conclusion about your presentation. Let's repeat together. To summarize, we have to realize the challenge. To sum up, I'd like to remind you that in conclusion, this new product will bring usually when we are done with our presentation, we have to be ready for Q&A session. And when you are dealing with question, first thing that you have to be sure that you must be able to answer the question that your listeners ask. And the only way to make sure that you give the right answer is by making sure you get the right question. So if you feel that you cannot hear the question clearly, or if you don't understand the questions being asked, then you should make sure you should clarify first what kind of questions that you get from your audience. Now you may make sure by saying, "Sorry, could you repeat that question? I didn't catch what you said." Or you may say, "Could you speak more slowly, please?" And in case your listener doesn't speak too loud, maybe they speak soft, you can tell them, "Could you speak up, please?" Speak up means speak louder. Let's practice this expression. "Sorry, sir. Could you repeat that? I didn't catch what you said." "Sorry, ma'am. Could you repeat the question? I didn't catch what you said." "Could you speak slowly, please?" "Could you speak up, please?" More expressions. Would you mind saying that again? I'll try to answer that. Well, then, it's a good question, and I have prepared my answer for that. So that's the end of my weekly podcast, and that's the second part of my explanation of lesson 2. I hope this video cast is very useful for you. And if you have any question, as always, you can shoot your question via email or Google Plus, and I will give you my best answer. Thank you for listening, and see you on Saturday.